the pristine white snow-coated Madison Avenue as I made my way to my little shop, a term my family loved throwing around at every holiday gathering. If they only knew that my modest storefront was just the tip of a very large, very profitable iceberg. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," Marcus, my CFO, greeted me as I entered through the back door of what appeared to be a high-end boutique. We proceeded through a hidden door to the real headquarters of Mitchell Global Ventures, occupying 5 secret floors above. "Status on the Harrison acquisition?" I asked, settling into my office with its one-way windows overlooking the bustling street below. "Everything's proceeding as planned. They have no idea we're behind the proxy purchases." Marcus handed me a thick folder. "We now control 48% of their shares." I smiled, thinking of my father's company Harrison Enterprises, and how they'd dismissed my business acumen for the past 7 years. Ever since I'd declined joining their prestigious family business to start my own venture. "Ms. Mitchell," my assistant Sarah interrupted via intercom, "your mother called. She's insisting you confirm your attendance at Christmas dinner." Of course she was. The annual Mitchell-Harrison family Christmas dinner, where my sister Amanda, father's golden child and Harrison Enterprises VP, would undoubtedly showcase her latest achievements, while questioning my life choices. "Confirm it," I said, opening my laptop to review the latest market reports. "And Sarah, make sure our special announcement is ready for December 26th. The day progressed with a steady stream of meetings, each carefully concealed behind the facade of my boutique. While my family thought I sold designer clothes to Manhattan's elite, I was actually orchestrating one of the largest silent takeovers in recent history. My phone buzzed, a text from Amanda. "Don't forget to dress appropriately for dinner. Some important Harrison board members will be there. Try to be professional." I glanced down at my Armani suit and Louboutin heels, worth more than her monthly salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Marcus," I called out, "show me the latest numbers on Harrison's European division." He pulled up a holographic display showing plummeting graphs. Down 30% under Amanda's leadership. Their board is getting nervous. "And our counteroffer for their Berlin subsidiary? Submitted through our shell corporation. They're desperate enough to accept any lifeline." I leaned back, remembering the day 7 years ago when I'd pitched my business plan to father. He'd barely glanced at it before passing it to Amanda, saying, "Show your sister how a real business proposal should look." Now Amanda was running their European division into the ground, while my little shop was about to become their worst nightmare. "Sarah," I pressed the intercom, "get me the latest report on Harrison's stock performance. And confirm our legal team is ready for next week." The week before Christmas passed in a blur of secret meetings and careful preparations. Each move calculated, each piece falling perfectly into place. By Christmas Eve, we owned 49.9% of Harrison Enterprises through various shell companies and proxy buyers. Standing in front of my mirror on Christmas morning, I chose my outfit carefully, an understated but exquisitely tailored black dress that cost more than a Harrison executive's annual bonus. The perfect attire for what would be my last Christmas dinner as the family's retail failure. "The car's ready, Ms. Mitchell," Sarah announced. "And the final contracts just arrived from legal." I picked up my phone, sending one last message to our board. "Proceed with Phase 3. Merry Christmas." As my driver pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of my boutique's modest storefront. By this time next week, my family would learn that their little shop girl had been playing a much bigger game all along. And I was about to win. The Harrison mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing with festive lights that did nothing to warm its imposing facade. My driver pulled up to the circular driveway where luxury cars were already lined up, board members' vehicles, I noted, mentally checking off names against our shareholder list. "Your coat, Ms. Mitchell." The butler reached for my Fendi wrap, his eyes widening slightly at the designer label. I couldn't help but smile. It probably cost more than his yearly salary. Holiday music and forced laughter drifted from the main hall. I checked my phone one last time. Our legal team had just confirmed the final stock purchase. 50.1%. The magic number that would change everything. "Victoria, you actually made it," Amanda's voice carried across the room, dripping with false warmth. My sister air-kissed my cheeks, her eyes scanning my outfit for something to criticize. "How's the boutique?" "Thriving," I replied simply, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. How's the European division? A flicker of unease crossed her face. She knew the numbers were bad, but had no idea I'd seen the real reports, the ones the board hadn't even seen yet. Victoria, darling. Mother swooped in, pearls gleaming. We were just discussing Amanda's latest acquisition. 300 million. Isn't that remarkable? I sipped my champagne, thinking of the billion-dollar deal I'd closed that morning. Fascinating. All approved by the board, I assume. Of course, Father joined our circle, chest puffed with pride. The Harrison board trusts Amanda's judgment implicitly. Unlike some people who prefer to play shop owner rather than learn real business. The familiar sting of his words had long since lost their power. Speaking of the board, I gestured toward James Harrison, Father's oldest friend and board chairman, who was making his way toward us. James. How lovely to see you. Victoria. He nodded curtly before turning to Father. John, we need to discuss the Berlin numbers. They're worse than dash. Perhaps not here, Amanda cut in quickly, shooting me a warning look. Family dinner isn't the place for business talk. Oh, but I find business fascinating, I smiled, checking my phone as another message came through. Especially European market fluctuations. What would you know about international markets? Amanda scoffed. Still running that little shop? The room had grown quieter, more board members drifting toward our conversation. Perfect. Actually, I set down my champagne. I've been meaning to discuss market expansion with you all. Particularly in relation to Harrison Enterprises. Father frowned. Victoria, this isn't the time for your small business theories. Small. I laughed softly. Father, when was the last time you checked your shareholder registry? The silence that followed was delicious. James Harrison pulled out his phone, fingers moving rapidly. What are you talking about? Amanda's voice had lost its condescending edge. Mitchell Global Ventures, I said clearly, watching their faces. Ring any bells? Oh. How about MGV Holdings? Or perhaps Victoria International Partners? James's face had gone pale. Those shell corporations, they've been buying up shares. Quite efficiently too, I nodded. Amazing what one can accomplish while running a little shop. Impossible, Father whispered. Those companies own nearly half of Harrison Enterprises. Actually, I checked my phone one last time. As of 4 minutes ago, we own 50.1%. Controlling interest, I believe it's called. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Amanda's fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Mother grabbed the nearest chair for support. You're lying. Father's face had turned red. This is some sort of joke. Would you like to see the paperwork? I reached for my purse. Or perhaps we should discuss the real state of the European division. Those numbers Amanda's been hiding from the board make for interesting reading. You can't. Amanda started. Can't what? Run a multinational corporation? Orchestrate a hostile takeover? Or perhaps you mean I can't possibly have built something bigger than your precious Harrison Enterprises while you weren't looking. I turned to address the shocked board members. Gentlemen, ladies, there's an emergency board meeting scheduled for December 26th. I suggest you attend. There will be some significant changes to discuss. This is our company. Father's voice shook with rage. You can't just walk in here and dash. Actually, it's my company now, I corrected him. And I'm not walking in, I'm taking over. Consider it my Christmas gift to the family. The room erupted in chaos. Board members huddled in corners, furiously making calls. Amanda had collapsed into a chair, her face ashen. Mother was dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My phone buzzed again. Everything was ready for tomorrow's announcement. I picked up a fresh champagne flute from a stunned-looking server. Well, I raised my glass to my shell-shocked family. Shall we have dinner? We should enjoy our last meal together as equals. Tomorrow's meeting will be quite different. The Harrison Enterprises boardroom buzzed with nervous energy on December 26th. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched snow begin to fall on Manhattan, a perfect backdrop for the corporate avalanche I was about to trigger. All board members are present, Sarah whispered, handing me the final dossier. Your father and sister are refusing to sit down. Indeed, Father and Amanda stood rigid by the window, their reflections showing matching expressions of barely contained rage. Mother sat nearby, nervously twisting her pearls, looking like she'd aged a decade since Christmas dinner. Then let's begin, I smiled, taking my place at the head of the table, Father's former seat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency board meeting. This is ridiculous, Amanda burst out. You can't possibly dash. Actually, I can, I interrupted, nodding to our legal team who began distributing documents. As majority shareholder of Harrison Enterprises, I can do quite a lot. Please, everyone review the packets in front of you. The room filled with the sound of rustling papers and sharp intakes of breath. The documents detailed not just my controlling ownership, but also the full extent of the company's problems under current management. These numbers, James Harrison spoke first, his face ashen. The European division losses. They're astronomical. Page 4 is particularly interesting, I suggested. The section about hidden debts and creative accounting. Amanda's face went white. Those reports were confidential. Nothing is confidential from the majority owner, I smiled. Including the private emails discussing how to hide these losses from the board. Speaking of which, I pressed a button and the room's screens lit up with damning evidence, emails, doctored reports, failed projects carefully concealed under layers of accounting tricks. You went through private communications? Father's voice shook with rage. I did what any responsible owner would do, thorough due diligence. What I found was decades of nepotism, mismanagement, and corporate negligence. I stood, commanding the room's attention. Harrison Enterprises was built by our grandfather to be an industry leader. Instead, it's becoming a cautionary tale. The screens changed to show a complex web of companies, my companies. While you were dismissing my little shop, I built Mitchell Global Ventures into a multinational corporation. We control technologies you haven't even heard of yet, markets you haven't thought to explore, and innovations that will reshape entire industries. And now, I continued, pressing another button to show a new organizational chart, we're going to save Harrison Enterprises from itself. Save it? Amanda scoffed weakly. You're destroying our family's legacy. No, sister dear. I'm preserving it. Just not for you. I turned to address the board directly. Effective immediately, there will be significant leadership changes. Amanda, you're removed from all positions. Father, you can retire gracefully or be voted out, your choice. The room erupted in chaos. Board members whispered frantically, legal teams exchanged documents, and Mother looked close to fainting. You can't do this to family, she pleaded. Family. I laughed. Was it family when you mocked my dreams? When you promoted Amanda despite her obvious incompetence? When you told me I'd never understand real business? I clicked through more slides showing my revival plan. Over the next 6 months, Harrison Enterprises will be completely restructured. Our Asian expansion begins next week. European operations will be overhauled. And our tech division will finally enter the modern age. The Mitchell-Harrison merger documents are ready, Sarah announced, distributing another round of papers. Merger. Father's voice cracked. You're merging the companies? Of course, I smiled. Mitchell Global Ventures will absorb Harrison Enterprises. The Harrison name will remain on select legacy products, but otherwise. I gestured to the new logo appearing on the screens. Welcome to the Mitchell era. The next 2 hours were a blur of votes, signatures, and legal procedures. By the time the press conference began, everything was done. Harrison Enterprises had new ownership, new leadership, and a new future. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, I caught my family's broken expressions in the corner. Father looked defeated, Mother was quietly crying, and Amanda stood frozen, her empire of lies collapsed around her. Ms. Mitchell, a reporter called out, what made you decide to take over your family's company? I thought about all the Christmas dinners where they'd belittled my achievements, all the condescending remarks about my little shop, all the years they'd underestimated me. Let's just say, I smiled directly at my family. I learned from the best. They taught me exactly what not to do. Later that evening, as snow continued to fall outside my new office, formerly Father's office, Sarah brought in the evening papers. The headlines all proclaimed variations of the same story: retail failure, returns as corporate queen, the Mitchell takeover shock. Your mother left this, Sarah said quietly, placing an envelope on my desk. Inside was a short note. "We were wrong. Please can we talk? Mom." I slipped the note into my drawer, turning back to the acquisition reports on my desk. They'd have to wait. I had an empire to run. "Sarah," I called out, "schedule the leadership transition meetings for tomorrow. And book Le Cirque for next week." "Family dinner?" she asked. "No," I smiled, picking up my grandfather's old photograph. "Business dinner. Family will have to earn their place at my table, just like I had to earn mine." The city lights twinkled through the falling snow, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The story of the little shop girl was over. The legend of the Mitchell Empire was just beginning. 1 year later, the Wall Street Journal headline said it all. Mitchell Global's first year post-merger. Record-breaking success. I set the paper aside as my car pulled up to the Harrison mansion, now the Mitchell estate after I'd acquired it in the company restructuring. "The guests are arriving, Ms. Mitchell," Sarah informed me as we walked through the grand entrance. "Including your family." Today marked the first annual Mitchell Global shareholders meeting, deliberately scheduled on Christmas Day. Poetic justice, considering how many Christmas dinners they'd spent mocking my ambitions. "Victoria," Mother approached cautiously. The past year had aged her, but she'd finally stopped wearing those ridiculous pearls. "The house looks different." "Modern," I corrected, gesturing to the sleek renovations. "Like our company." Father and Amanda lingered by the fireplace, both looking uncomfortable in their new roles as minority shareholders. After extensive negotiations and legal proceedings, I'd allowed them to keep small stakes in the company under strict conditions. "The European division reports are exceptional," James Harrison commented, now serving as a regular board member. "Up 200% since the restructuring. Amazing what proper management can accomplish," I smiled, watching Amanda wince. Her former division, now led by one of my hand-picked executives, had become our most profitable sector. "If everyone would take their seats," Sarah announced, "Ms. Mitchell will begin the shareholders' presentation." As I took my place at the head of the table, I couldn't help but appreciate the symmetry. 1 year ago they'd laughed at my little shop. Now they sat in my house at my table, waiting to hear how I'd transformed their failing company into a global powerhouse. "Welcome to the first annual Mitchell Global shareholders meeting," I began, every word of victory. "Let's discuss how our small business changed the face of international commerce." The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And this time I was writing the story. The champagne flute felt fragile in my hand as I watched my family's annual holiday party unfold around me. Mom had outdone herself this year, transforming our suburban living room into what she called an elegant gathering for successful people. The guest list read like a who's who of local achievement. The mayor, 3 city council members, the hospital chief of staff, and various business leaders who'd made their mark in our mid-sized Pennsylvania city. I stood near the kitchen doorway, officially present but carefully positioned where I wouldn't interfere with the evening's carefully orchestrated networking opportunities. "Lauren, darling," I heard Mom explaining to Mrs. Patterson from the country club, "my daughter works for the government. Something with international coordination." International coordination. After 6 years as a senior policy advisor specializing in Middle Eastern diplomatic relations, my career had been reduced to something with international coordination. "How nice," Mrs. Patterson replied with the polite disinterest reserved for vague government work. "And your son Michael? I heard he made partner at his law firm." "Yes." Mom's voice brightened considerably. "Michael's been incredibly successful. Just bought a beautiful home in the Fairmont district. His wife Sarah is here tonight. She's a pediatric nurse. Such accomplished young people. Accomplished young people." Michael had made junior partner at a regional firm that specialized in personal injury cases. Sarah worked part-time at the local children's clinic. They were lovely people doing honest work, but their combined annual income was less than what I spent on travel expenses for my State Department assignments. "And where's Lauren tonight?" Mrs. Patterson asked, scanning the room. I watched Mom's eyes find me across the crowded living room. For a moment she looked uncertain, as if deciding whether acknowledging my presence would enhance or detract from the evening's sophisticated atmosphere. "She's around somewhere," Mom said finally. "She keeps a low profile. Government work, you know." Very bureaucratic. Bureaucratic. Last month, I'd been part of the negotiating team that secured a crucial water rights agreement between Jordan and Israel. The week before that, I'd briefed the Secretary of State on emerging political dynamics in Syria. But to my family's social circle, I was just another government bureaucrat shuffling papers in some anonymous office. Lauren doesn't really fit in with this crowd, I heard my brother Michael tell his college friend near the fireplace. She's more comfortable with books than people. Always been the academic type. The academic type. As if my PhD in international relations from Georgetown was somehow less practical than his law degree from the regional state university. Plus, her work is so abstract, Sarah added, sipping her wine. It's hard to explain what she actually does. Not like medicine or law where you can see the impact. 3 weeks ago, my analysis of Iranian nuclear policy had been cited in the president's daily briefing. My recommendations on refugee resettlement had shaped federal policy affecting thousands of families. But because that work happened behind closed doors, it apparently didn't register as real achievement. I checked my phone discreetly. A text from my assistant at State. PM Morrison's security advance team confirms 7 p.m. arrival. Motorcade approximately 6:55 p.m. Prime Minister Morrison of Australia was arriving in 5 minutes for what my family assumed was a routine government meeting. They had no idea that he'd personally requested this meeting to discuss the ANZUS treaty renewal, or that it was taking place at our family home because I'd arranged for private diplomatic channels that wouldn't attract media attention. You know, Mayor Davidson said to my parents near the appetizer table, it's wonderful that you support Lauren's government work, but has she considered transitioning to something more visible? The private sector offers so many opportunities for young people with her education. Visible. Like Michael's billboard advertisements for his personal injury practice, or like Sarah's photo in the hospital newsletter announcing her Employee of the Month award. We keep encouraging her to think bigger, Dad replied. Government work is fine for a while, but eventually she'll need to move into something with real growth potential. Real growth potential. My current position was 3 levels below the Secretary of State. My security clearance was higher than most members of Congress. My next assignment was being considered for ambassador to a Middle Eastern country whose name I couldn't mention at cocktail parties. But none of that mattered because it wasn't visible success that could be packaged into dinner party conversation. My phone buzzed again. Motorcade turning onto your street now. Perfect timing. The holiday party reached its social peak around 6:45 p.m., with Mom orchestrating introductions between the right people, while strategically managing conversations to showcase our family's connections to local success stories. I remained in my designated peripheral role, nursing my champagne and listening to increasingly creative explanations of why I didn't quite belong in this accomplished gathering. Lauren's always been different, I heard Aunt Carol explain to the bank president's wife. Very intellectual but not really ambitious in a practical sense. Government work suits people who prefer stability over achievement. Stability over achievement. Last year, I'd received the State Department's Distinguished Honor Award for my work on Middle Eastern policy initiatives. The ceremony had been attended by foreign dignitaries and senior administration officials. But since my family hadn't been invited, diplomatic ceremonies weren't public events. It might as well have never happened. The thing about government jobs, the hospital administrator said to anyone within earshot, is that they don't really prepare you for leadership roles. Too much bureaucracy, not enough real-world experience. Real-world experience. I'd spent the last 3 months negotiating water rights agreements between countries that had been enemies for decades. My bureaucratic work involved managing relationships with officials whose decisions affected millions of lives. Michael's so lucky to have found his calling, Mom said to a cluster of wives gathered near the piano. Partnership track at 32 beautiful home wonderful wife. Lauren could learn something about setting achievable goals. Achievable goals. My current goal was preventing a regional water crisis that could destabilize 3 allied nations. Michael's current goal was increasing his client base for slip-and-fall cases. I watched the mayor glad hand his way through the crowd, discussing municipal bond initiatives and downtown development projects with the kind of animated enthusiasm that my family found impressive. Real leadership, visible impact, tangible results. Everything they thought my career lacked. Your parents must worry about Lauren's future, I overheard Mrs. Patterson saying to Michael's wife. Government work is so uncertain. What happens when administrations change? They do worry, Sarah replied with performative sympathy. Lauren's brilliant, but she's never learned to translate that into practical success. She's always been more comfortable in academic settings than in competitive environments. Competitive environments. The Middle Eastern diplomatic scene was arguably one of the most competitive and high-stakes professional environments in the world. But since none of my family understood international relations, they'd decided I was hiding from real challenges. My phone vibrated with another update, 2 minutes out. Australian security confirms all protocols in place. Around me, the party continued its familiar rhythm. Local politicians discussed infrastructure projects. Business leaders shared expansion plans. Medical professionals debated hospital board policies. Everyone engaged in the kind of concrete, visible success that translated easily into dinner party conversation. You know what Lauren needs? Uncle Bob announced from his position near the bar. She needs to come work for someone like Davidson here. Municipal government, local impact, measurable results. None of this federal bureaucracy nonsense. Municipal government. Mayor Davidson managed a city of 84,000 people. I advised on policies affecting entire regions of the Middle East. Bob's right, Dad agreed enthusiastically. Lauren, you should talk to Mayor Davidson about opportunities. Real government work where you can see the difference you're making. Real government work. As opposed to the fake government work I'd been doing for the State Department. I'd be happy to discuss it, Mayor Davidson said with the magnanimous tone of someone offering charity to an underachiever. We're always looking for qualified people who want to contribute to their community. Contribute to their community. While he'd been managing parking meter policies, I'd been working to prevent international conflicts that could affect global oil prices. That's so generous, Mom beamed. Lauren could really benefit from mentorship by someone with your experience. My phone buzzed one final time. Motorcade in position. PM Morrison requesting confirmation of meeting location. I typed back, confirmed. Please proceed to front door. Through the living room window I could see black SUVs with tinted windows pulling up to our suburban curb. Neighbors across the street had begun gathering on their porches, obviously curious about the sudden appearance of what looked like a presidential motorcade in our quiet residential neighborhood. What's all that commotion outside? Someone asked. I set down my champagne flute and smoothed my dress. That would be my 7 p.m. appointment. The room went quiet as everyone turned toward the windows, watching uniformed security personnel take positions around our house. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m. Through the front windows, the entire party could see Australian security personnel flanking our entrance while additional agents maintained perimeter positions around the house. I'll get that, I said, moving toward the front door with the calm confidence of someone expecting exactly this scenario. The room had gone completely silent. 30 local dignitaries watched as I opened the door to reveal Prime Minister Morrison of Australia, flanked by his security detail and diplomatic staff. Miss Chen, the Prime Minister said with a warm smile, thank you for arranging this private venue for our discussion. I hope we're not intruding on your family's holiday celebration. Not at all, Prime Minister Morrison. Please come in. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of champagne flutes hitting carpet as several guests processed what they were witnessing. The Prime Minister entered our suburban living room with the practiced ease of someone comfortable in any setting, his security team maintaining professional positions while his diplomatic aide carried a briefcase that clearly contained classified materials. I believe you know why I'm here, he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned room. The ANZUS Treaty renewal requires delicate handling, and your expertise on Pacific regional security has been invaluable. ANZUS Treaty renewal. The Australia-New Zealand-United States Security Treaty. The foundational defense agreement that had anchored Pacific security for over 70 years. Of course, I replied. Shall we use my father's study for privacy? Actually, the Prime Minister said, glancing around the room with diplomatic politeness, perhaps I should greet your family first. It's not often I have the chance to thank the family of one of America's most skilled diplomatic advisors personally. Most skilled diplomatic advisors. The words hung in the air like a diplomatic bombshell. Mayor Davidson had turned an alarming shade of white. The hospital administrator looked like he was reconsidering every assumption he'd made about government bureaucracy. Mom stood frozen near the piano, her mouth slightly open. "Prime Minister," I said, "I'd like you to meet my parents, Robert and Margaret Chin." "Mom, Dad, this is Prime Minister Morrison of Australia." The Prime Minister stepped forward with genuine warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Chin, you should be extraordinarily proud of your daughter's work. Her analysis of Pacific security dynamics has been instrumental in shaping our bilateral defense cooperation." We. Mom stammered. "Lauren's recommendations on regional trade security," the Prime Minister continued, "have prevented potential disruptions that could have cost both our economies billions of dollars." Michael finally found his voice. "You work with foreign governments. I coordinate multilateral policy initiatives across 17 Pacific allies," I said simply. The Prime Minister requested tonight's meeting to finalize security protocols before next month's G20 summit. The G20 summit, where I'd be representing American interests in conversations with 19 other world leaders. "Ms. Chen," the Prime Minister's aide interjected politely, "we should begin our discussion. The encryption protocols expire at 8 p.m. "Of course." I turned to my family's stunned gathering. "Please excuse me. Duty calls." As I led the Prime Minister toward Dad's study, I heard Uncle Bob whisper to his wife, "Did she just say G20 summit?" "Yes, Uncle Bob." The same niece you thought needed career advice was about to brief a foreign head of government on international security policy. The evening had taken an interesting turn. The meeting with Prime Minister Morrison lasted 45 minutes. We finalized security protocols for the upcoming G20 summit and established diplomatic channels for ongoing Pacific defense cooperation. When he left, his parting words carried clearly through the still silent living room. "Please give my regards to Secretary Blinken. Your briefing materials for next week's summit are exactly what we needed." Secretary Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, who apparently relied on my briefing materials. The holiday party never recovered its festive momentum. Mayor Davidson left early, mumbling something about not realizing the scope of federal operations. The hospital administrator suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. One by one, the local dignitaries made polite excuses and departed, leaving behind half-empty champagne glasses and a family in shock. "Lauren," Mom said finally, "why didn't you tell us about this?" "About what?" "My job. About working with world leaders. You never asked what I actually did. You decided I was a bureaucrat and stopped listening." Dad found his voice. "The Prime Minister of Australia came to our house. For you. Government work," I said quietly. "Very bureaucratic." 6 months later, I was confirmed as U.S. Ambassador to Jordan. The ceremony was attended by foreign dignitaries, senior administration officials, and members of Congress. My family wasn't invited. Diplomatic ceremonies aren't cocktail party material. But the local newspaper ran a front-page story about their hometown ambassador, complete with quotes from neighbors who'd witnessed the Prime Minister's visit. Mom framed the article and hung it in the living room, right next to Michael's law school diploma. Some achievements are too big to hide behind bureaucracy. The birthday cake sat untouched on the kitchen island as my brother Daniel delivered what he clearly considered a masterpiece of fraternal intervention. At 31, he'd finally been promoted to senior account manager at his regional marketing firm, an achievement he'd mentioned approximately 15 times since arriving at my parents' house an hour earlier. "Look, Alex," he said, gesturing with his beer bottle for emphasis, "it's time someone said this. You're 28 years old. Stop pretending to be an entrepreneur." The family gathering, assembled to celebrate Dad's 60th birthday, turned their attention to the familiar entertainment of dissecting my life choices. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends formed an impromptu audience for Daniel's performance. "I mean, what do you actually do all day?" Daniel continued, warming to his theme. "Sit in your apartment making PowerPoints about imaginary businesses?" The PowerPoints weren't imaginary. They were investor presentations for Cloud Secure Analytics, the cybersecurity platform I'd been developing for 3 years. But to my family, any work that didn't involve a traditional office, fixed schedule, and obvious boss was essentially elaborate unemployment. "Daniel has a point," Aunt Rebecca chimed in from the living room. At some point you need to accept reality and find stable employment. Stable employment. Like Daniel's job managing social media campaigns for local car dealerships. Or like my cousin Mark's position selling insurance to small businesses. I keep telling him, Mom said, refilling wine glasses with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd hosted this exact conversation dozens of times. There are excellent opportunities in corporate America for people with his technical background. Technical background. I had dual degrees from MIT in computer science and business administration. My technical background included developing cybersecurity protocols that were currently protecting Fortune 500 companies' data infrastructure. The problem is Alex thinks he's too good for normal jobs, Dad added, cutting himself another slice of birthday cake. He's always been a dreamer. A dreamer. Last month, I'd signed a partnership agreement with Amazon Web Services to integrate Cloud Secure into their enterprise security suite. The deal was worth $47 million over 3 years, but the announcement wouldn't be public until tomorrow morning when the stock market opened. Remember when he was 12 and wanted to be an inventor? Daniel laughed. Some people never grow out of the fantasy phase. Family members chuckled appreciatively. This was well-worn territory. Alex the dreamer, Alex the impractical one, Alex who needed to come down to earth. I've actually been thinking, Uncle Steve said, leaning back in his recliner with the confidence of someone who'd never risked anything more adventurous than a restaurant investment. Maybe it's time for some tough love. No more family financial support until he gets a real job. Financial support. They thought I was living off family money because I didn't have a traditional paycheck. The truth was more complex. I'd been quietly supporting myself through consulting contracts and small investments while building Cloud Secure. My savings account held more money than Daniel would earn in the next 5 years. Steve's right, Mom agreed. We're enabling this behavior by letting him avoid responsibility. I could talk to my boss, Daniel offered magnanimously. We might have an opening in our IT department. Entry level, but everyone has to start somewhere. Entry-level IT. My brother wanted to help me find a job troubleshooting email problems and installing software updates. That's generous, Daniel, Dad said approvingly. Family helping family. That's how real success works. Real success. Like Daniel's company car. A leased Honda Civic that he treated like a status symbol. Like Mark's insurance sales awards hanging in his cubicle. Like the collective satisfaction of 30 relatives who'd never built anything more complex than an IKEA bookshelf. What do you say, Alex? Daniel asked with exaggerated patience. Ready to join the real world? I glanced at my phone. 7:47 p.m. West Coast time. Tomorrow morning, Bloomberg would announce that Cloud Secure Analytics was going public in a landmark IPO valued at $800 million. My 73% ownership stake would make me worth more than my entire extended family combined. You know what, Daniel? I said, setting down my untouched piece of cake. Tomorrow's going to be very educational about what constitutes real success. Daniel grinned, completely missing the edge in my voice. That's the spirit. Ready to stop playing entrepreneur and start building something actual? More ready than you can possibly imagine. The birthday party continued for another hour. Each family member taking their turn to offer career guidance with the confidence of people who'd never created anything more innovative than an Excel spreadsheet. I nodded politely while they competed to deliver the most devastating critique of my pretend business phase. You know what your problem is, Alex? Cousin Mark said, loosening his tie after his third beer. You think you're smarter than everyone else. You think traditional careers are beneath you. Traditional careers. Like Mark's insurance sales job, where he cold-called small business owners and earned a commission on policies most of them couldn't afford. Mark's absolutely right, Daniel agreed. Alex has always had this superiority complex about normal work. Like the rest of us are somehow failing because we have steady jobs. Steady jobs. Daniel's steady position at the marketing firm paid $52,000 a year and required him to manage Instagram accounts for used car lots. Last quarter, Cloud Secure's revenue had exceeded $2 million. I think it comes from watching too many movies about Silicon Valley, Dad suggested, cutting himself a third piece of birthday cake. He thinks everyone becomes a millionaire with some app idea. Some app idea. Cloud Secure wasn't an app, It was enterprise-grade cybersecurity infrastructure that analyzed network threats in real time using machine learning algorithms I'd developed over 18 months of 12-hour days. Plus, let's be honest, Aunt Rebecca added, how many of these tech startups actually succeed? Most of them fail within a year. Most of them. She was probably thinking about local businesses, coffee shops, consulting services, retail stores. She had no framework for understanding technology companies, venture capital, or the difference between lifestyle businesses and scalable platforms. That's why established companies are safer, Uncle Steve explained to the room. Daniel's got job security benefits, a 401k. That's real wealth building. Real wealth building. Daniel's 401k contained approximately $34,000. My personal investment portfolio, built from consulting income while developing CloudSecure, was worth more than $6 million. I just wish Alex would be realistic about his capabilities, Mom said, refilling glasses with wine that cost less than what I'd spent on lunch yesterday. Not everyone can be Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs. As if entrepreneurship was limited to once-in-a-generation visionaries instead of the thousands of successful business owners who built valuable companies every year. Exactly, Daniel said. Alex, you're a smart guy, but you're not revolutionary. You're just normal. Like the rest of us. Normal. Tomorrow morning, Forbes would run a feature story about CloudSecure's IPO, calling it one of the most significant cybersecurity innovations since firewall technology. The article would describe me as the kind of technical visionary who bridges the gap between complex engineering and practical business applications. Maybe we should stage an intervention, Cousin Lisa suggested half-jokingly. Seriously, Alex. When are you going to admit this startup thing isn't working and get a real job? An intervention. For the family member whose company was about to debut on the New York Stock Exchange with a market valuation approaching $1 billion. I actually looked into this, Jennifer, Daniel's wife, said, pulling out her phone. There are statistics about entrepreneurship failure rates. It's really scary how many people waste years chasing businesses that never make money. Waste years. I'd spent 3 years building something that employed 47 people, protected data for hundreds of companies, and generated enough revenue to fund my family's combined lifestyles for the next decade. That's why corporate careers are the smart choice, Daniel concluded. Steady advancement, predictable income, clear success metrics. You know exactly where you stand. I knew exactly where I stood. Tomorrow morning when the market opened, I'd be worth approximately $584 million. Daniel's steady advancement over the past 3 years had resulted in a salary increase of $8,000. My phone buzzed with a text from my investment banker. Final IPO pricing confirmed. Opening at $47 per share. Congratulations, Alex. You're about to become very, very wealthy. I put the phone away and looked around the room at my family. 30 people who'd spent the evening explaining why I needed to abandon my dreams and settle for their version of security. Tomorrow morning, they'd discover exactly how expensive their advice had been. The New York Stock Exchange opened at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Time. I was awake at 5:45, coffee in hand, watching the pre-market trading on my laptop from my downtown Seattle apartment. The same apartment my family considered evidence of my failure to launch properly into adulthood. CloudSecure Analytics went public at exactly 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The stock opened at $47 per share and immediately spiked to $63. By 10 a.m., it had hit $71. My 73% ownership stake was now worth over $600 million. At 10:47 a.m. Pacific Time, Bloomberg Television ran their first segment about the IPO. CloudSecure Analytics debuted on the New York Stock Exchange this morning in one of the year's most successful technology offerings, the anchor announced. The cybersecurity company, founded by 28-year-old Alex Chin, opened at $47 and is currently trading at $74 per share. The screen displayed CloudSecure's logo alongside my MIT graduation photo and a graph showing the stock's meteoric rise. Chen, who built the company from his Seattle apartment over 3 years, owns 73% of CloudSecure's shares, making him one of the youngest billionaires in technology history. One of the youngest billionaires in technology history. Not bad for someone who'd been advised to seek entry-level IT work less than 24 hours earlier. My phone started ringing at 11:03 a.m. Daniel's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 11:07. And 11:15. And 11:23. Finally at 11:30 I answered. Alex. Daniel's voice was strained, uncertain. Did you see? Are you watching the news? Which news? Bloomberg. They're talking about cloud secure analytics. They're saying the founder. They're saying it's you. It is me. Silence. Then, but the company they're talking about is worth billions of dollars. 640 million as of about 10 minutes ago, but yes. But how? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? I did tell you. You said I was pretending to be an entrepreneur and needed to get a real job. I could hear commotion in the background. Probably Mom grabbing the TV remote to find Bloomberg. Alex, we didn't know, Daniel said finally. We thought your business was we didn't realize it was real. Real enough for the New York Stock Exchange, apparently. But if we'd known about the IPO, about the money. If you'd known I was successful enough to make you look good by association, you mean? More background noise. Dad's voice. Is that really him? On Bloomberg. Dad. The dreamer just became a billionaire. Alex, son. Mom's voice came through the speaker as Daniel put the call on speakerphone. We made a mistake. We should have supported your vision. You should have asked what my vision actually was before deciding it was worthless. Can we talk about this? As a family? Daniel asked. Maybe we could meet for dinner tonight and... I'm booked tonight. Interview with CNBC about cybersecurity innovation. Tomorrow then? Tomorrow I'm flying to New York to ring the closing bell at the NYSE. Silence. When will you be free? Mom asked quietly. When I decide that family relationships are worth more than the money you suddenly care about. I hung up and watched CloudSecure's stock hit $81 per share. My net worth had just crossed $700 million. Not bad for a dreamer. The media attention lasted 6 weeks. CloudSecure's stock stabilized at $93 per share, making my stake worth over $800 million. Harvard Business School invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship conference. President Biden's economic advisory team requested a briefing on cybersecurity policy. The family calls never stopped. Daniel left voicemails explaining that he'd always believed in my potential and had just been playing devil's advocate to help me stay grounded. Mom sent handwritten letters about how proud she'd always been of my independent spirit. Dad started telling neighbors about his brilliant entrepreneur son. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I established the Chin Foundation for Technology Education, endowing it with $50 million to provide coding scholarships for low-income students. The press release mentioned my motivation, supporting young innovators who might not have traditional family backing for their entrepreneurial dreams. 3 months after the IPO, I received a wedding invitation from my cousin Lisa. Someone had handwritten a note on the card. Alex, hope you can attend. Would love to celebrate your success with the family. My success. The same success they'd spent years dismissing as fantasy. I declined the invitation and sent an expensive gift with a note. Congratulations on your celebration. Unfortunately, I'm still busy pretending to be an entrepreneur. The foundation's first scholarship recipients were announced the following week. 25 students whose families had discouraged their interest in technology careers. Sometimes the best revenge is proving that dreamers build the future while pragmatists manage the past. I never attended another family birthday party. The ivory wedding invitation arrived with my name written in elegant calligraphy, but the glaring absence of "and guest" made my single status as obvious as a neon sign. I turned the heavy cardstock over looking for some oversight, but found only the return address. Michael and Amanda Thompson request your presence. Not your presence and that of your guest. Just me alone as always. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom buzzed with pre-ceremony excitement as I found my assigned seat in the back row, directly behind a marble pillar that effectively blocked any view of the altar. Around me, cousins and college acquaintances filled chairs with their spouses, children, and significant others. A sea of coupled bliss that made my solitary presence feel like a statement. Rebecca. My mother appeared beside me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and maternal disappointment. You look lovely, sweetheart. That dress is very professional. I smoothed my navy sheath dress, purchased specifically because it looked appropriate for both weddings and board meetings. At 31, I'd learned to choose versatile pieces that could transition seamlessly from family obligations to the international business meetings that consumed most of my calendar. "Where's your guest area?" she continued, scanning the empty space beside me. "No +1, I said simply. Mom's smile tightened with the particular brand of embarrassment reserved for family members who failed to meet basic life expectations. "Oh, well, I suppose it makes sense. You're so focused on work there's hardly time for relationships." Michael strode over in his custom tuxedo, radiating the confidence of a man who'd achieved everything a 34-year-old was supposed to achieve. Corner office at Hartwell & Associates, beautiful fiancée with an equally impressive career, and the kind of social circle that populated country club directories. "Becca. Glad you could make it." He kissed my cheek with practiced brotherly affection, then glanced around my seating area. "Flying solo tonight? Seemed appropriate." "Well, don't worry about it. Plenty of single guys here tonight. Amanda's law school friends, some colleagues from Hartwell. Maybe you'll meet someone who appreciates your unique lifestyle." My unique lifestyle. That was Michael's diplomatic way of referencing my frequent travel, my reluctance to discuss my work in detail, and my general failure to achieve the markers of conventional success that he could explain to his friends at dinner parties. "Actually," Michael continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Charles Hartwell is here tonight, my CO, and he might come over to say hello. I've mentioned you work in consulting, but try to keep it general, okay? He's very traditional about family image." Charles Hartwell. I'd been hearing about him for 3 years as Michael climbed the ranks at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-size consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring and strategic planning. Michael spoke about Hartwell with the reverence usually reserved for religious figures. A brilliant businessman who'd built the company from nothing into a regional powerhouse. "He's incredibly selective about his inner circle," Michael explained, straightening his bow tie nervously. "Only associates people with real achievement, solid family backgrounds. Tonight's basically my unofficial evaluation for the senior partner track." I nodded, understanding while mentally calculating time zones. My assistant in London would be handling the final paperwork for tomorrow's acquisition announcement, while my legal team in New York was preparing press releases that would fundamentally restructure the regional consulting market. "The thing is," Michael continued, "Hartwell values family stability, traditional success markers. When he asks about your career, maybe emphasize the consulting aspect and downplay the unconventional parts." The unconventional parts. My refusal to discuss my work beyond vague references to business consulting. My apparent lack of career progression that anyone could identify. My failure to settle down, buy a house, or demonstrate any of the life achievements that made sense to people like Charles Hartwell. "Rebecca works internationally," Mom added helpfully, joining our conversation with a glass of champagne. "She travels constantly for her consulting projects. Very independent." "Sounds fascinating," said Amanda, gliding over in her wedding dress like something from a fairy tale. "Michael mentioned you work with overseas clients? That must be so exotic." Exotic. My work developing strategic acquisition frameworks for multinational corporations had been reduced to exotic travel consulting. "Ladies and gentlemen," the wedding coordinator announced, "please take your seats for the ceremony. We're ready to begin." I settled into my back row chair behind the marble pillar, pulling out my phone to check messages from 3 time zones while my family and their important guests prepared to witness Michael's perfect life milestone. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as Amanda floated down the aisle, her train cascading behind her like liquid silk. From my obstructed view behind the pillar, I caught glimpses of the ceremony between guests' heads and floral arrangements, enough to see Michael's beaming face as he married his accomplished attorney bride. During the vows, I discreetly checked my messages. 3 urgent emails from my acquisition team, 2 from the board of directors, and 1 marked confidential from our head of corporate communications. The confidential message was brief but significant. "Rebecca Hartwell acquisition paperwork finalized. Press announcement scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow as planned. Charles Hartwell has been briefed and will remain as CEO under new ownership structure. Congratulations on number 12 this year." I glanced toward the front of the ballroom where Charles Hartwell sat in the 3rd row, distinguished and confident, completely unaware that his company had been purchased by the woman his star employee's family considered a professional disappointment. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and applause erupted as Michael and Amanda sealed their union with a kiss that would grace their mantelpiece for decades. The cocktail hour began immediately, with guests flowing toward the terrace where champagne fountains and passed hors d'oeuvres awaited. I used the crowd movement to find a quiet corner where I could handle business calls without attracting attention. "Rebecca." Michael appeared at my elbow, practically glowing with post-ceremony euphoria. "Come meet some people. Charles Hartwell specifically asked to be introduced to you." He guided me through clusters of celebrating guests toward a distinguished man in his early 60s who commanded attention simply by standing still. Charles Hartwell possessed the kind of executive presence that filled rooms and boardrooms with equal effectiveness. "Mr. Hartwell," Michael said with barely concealed excitement, "I'd like you to meet my sister Rebecca, the one I mentioned who works in international consulting." Hartwell extended his hand with practiced professional courtesy. "Miss Davidson. Michael speaks about you frequently. He mentioned you travel extensively for work." "Quite a bit," I confirmed, shaking his hand while noting the slight confusion in his eyes. Most successful executives developed an instinct for recognizing their peers, and something about our interaction wasn't computing correctly for him. "What type of consulting?" he asked, his tone politely interested but probing. "Corporate acquisitions and strategic restructuring," I replied simply. The change in his expression was subtle but immediate. His polite interest sharpened into something more focused, more analytical. "That's quite specialized work. Which firm do you work with?" "I'm independent. I work with various investment groups on acquisition projects." Michael jumped in helpfully. "Rebecca's very modest about her work. She travels constantly, works with international clients. Very impressive for someone who's still figuring out her career path." "Still figuring out my career path." I watched Hartwell's expression as he processed this contradiction. Highly specialized work versus someone still finding herself professionally. "Independent acquisition consulting," Hartwell repeated slowly. "That's unusual. Most serious acquisition work happens through established firms with significant resources. Or private investment groups with specialized portfolios," I said quietly. Something clicked in Hartwell's expression. The polite professional interest transformed into something sharper, more calculating. He studied my face with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. "Excuse me," he said, pulling out his phone. "I need to make a quick call." He stepped away from our group, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent but quiet tones. Through the crowd, I could see him gesturing as he spoke, his body language shifting from social to deeply professional. "Strange," Michael observed. "He seems distracted suddenly. I hope I didn't say something wrong about your work." Amanda joined us, champagne glass in hand and glowing with bridal happiness. "What a beautiful ceremony. Mr. Hartwell seems very interested in Rebecca's career." "That's so nice. Successful people love mentoring others who are still building their paths." "Still building my path." I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. The acquisition announcement would go live in 12 hours and 13 minutes, fundamentally changing Charles Hartwell's professional reality. My phone buzzed with a text from my legal team. "Hartwell briefing materials prepared for morning announcement. His employment contract guarantees CEO position under new ownership. Smooth transition expected." Hartwell returned to our group, his demeanor noticeably different. Gone was the politely interested social interaction, replaced by the focused attention of someone conducting serious business. "Ms. Davidson," he said formally, "could I speak with you privately for a moment? I have some questions about your consulting work." Michael beamed with pride. "Of course. Rebecca, this could be a wonderful networking opportunity." Hartwell guided me to a quiet corner of the terrace, away from the celebration's cheerful chaos. His entire demeanor had shifted from wedding guest to CEO conducting urgent business. "Ms. Davidson," he began carefully, "I just spoke with my head of corporate development. There's been some interesting activity in our company's ownership structure today." "Oh." "Specifically, a complete acquisition by an entity called RD International Holdings. A company I'd never heard of until 30 minutes ago." His eyes never left my face. My legal team just informed me that RD International Holdings is owned by something called Davidson Strategic Enterprises. I waited silently, watching him connect the dots with the methodical precision that had built Hartwell and Associates into a successful firm. Davidson Strategic Enterprises, he continued, is apparently owned by one Rebecca Davidson, a very successful acquisition specialist who's purchased 12 companies this year alone. The sounds of the wedding celebration, laughter, clinking glasses, the string quartet's romantic melodies, seemed to fade into background noise as Hartwell's professional world realigned itself around this new information. So when my star employee's sister mentions she works in corporate acquisitions and strategic restructuring, he said slowly, she's not describing her career aspirations. She's describing the business activities that just made her my new boss. Technically, I corrected, you'll continue as CEO. The acquisition is designed to be seamless for existing management and employees. Hartwell stared at me for a long moment, then began to laugh, not with humor, but with the sound of someone recognizing a cosmic joke being played at their expense. Michael has no idea, does he? My family thinks I work in consulting. You do work in consulting. You consult with companies about being acquired. He shook his head in amazement. How long have you been building your acquisition portfolio? 8 years. And your family thinks you're still finding yourself professionally. It's easier than explaining. Through the terrace windows, I could see Michael moving through the crowd, basking in the congratulations and attention that came with marrying well and working for a prestigious firm. He was in his element, surrounded by successful professionals who understood his achievements and could place his career trajectory in context they respected. The press announcement goes live tomorrow morning, I said. Your employees will learn about the ownership change through official channels. Your job security is guaranteed in the transition documents. Hartwell pulled out his phone again. I need to call my board of directors. They'll want to understand what this means for company operations. Nothing changes operationally. I acquire well-managed companies specifically because they don't need restructuring. And Michael? I looked through the windows at my brother, who was animatedly describing his promotion prospects to a group of wedding guests, completely unaware that his career trajectory had just been fundamentally altered by his unsuccessful sister. Michael's employment is secure. His performance reviews have been excellent. Hartwell's phone was buzzing with incoming calls. I should take these. My entire executive team apparently wants to discuss our new ownership situation. As he walked away to handle the corporate crisis unfolding on his phone, I heard him say to someone, "You're not going to believe this, but I just met my new boss at my employee's wedding. She was seated in the back row because the family thinks she's unsuccessful." Sunday morning brought chaos to Michael's honeymoon suite. The Business Journal's headline read, "Regional consulting firm acquired in surprise deal," with a subheading that made Michael spit out his coffee. Davidson Strategic Enterprises continues aggressive expansion. Amanda found the full article online. Davidson Strategic Enterprises is owned by Rebecca Davidson, 31, who has acquired 12 companies this year, building one of the region's most successful private investment portfolios. Michael called me before 7 a.m., his voice tight with confusion and something approaching panic. "Becca, there's an article about someone with your name buying Hartwell and Associates. People are asking if we're related." "We are related." The silence stretched long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. "You bought my company?" "I acquired a well-managed consulting firm with strong leadership and growth potential." What do you do for work?" "I buy companies, optimize their operations and build strategic portfolios. It's what I've been doing for 8 years while you explained to people that I was finding myself." Charles Hartwell called Tuesday to report that employee morale was actually higher after the acquisition announcement. Apparently, being owned by someone who builds successful companies is preferable to being owned by someone who might sell to the highest bidder. The most satisfying moment came Thursday when the Business Journal called for an interview about successful young entrepreneurs. The photographer wanted to shoot at my corporate office rather than a coffee shop, which seemed more appropriate for someone who owned 12 companies. Michael's wedding photos turned out beautifully, though he never framed the ones with me visible in the background. Apparently having an unsuccessful sister was manageable, but having a more successful sister required different conversations entirely. Sometimes the best wedding gift is learning who you really are.